Hello everyone, it's your Peacekeeper, and it's time for the first video. Actually, it's our second video now, isn't it? Yeah, it's our second video. Our second video in the How to Play series on the Japanese cruiser line. And for this, yes, we're going to start off with the Tier 1 Hashidate. However, what we're not going to do is go into in-depth tactics for a ship that is going to be a flash in the pan, for lack of a better phrase, in terms of time spent on the ship, plus tactics at Tier 1, basically non-existent, due largely in part to the lack of variability in the shell types. So, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about tactics. Instead, what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the Japanese cruiser line as a whole, what to expect going forward from Tier 1 onward. That way you have kind of an idea of what to expect by the time you get to Zhao at Tier 10. But before we do that, let's talk briefly about the history and what this ship actually is, because I know a lot of people are really curious about that. I know I certainly was. The Hashidate class gunboats were a class of 2 ships laid down in 1939, ordered in 1937. It was Hashidate and Uji were the 2 ships of the class. They were primarily intended as escort ships, for lack of a better phrase, or harbor patrol boats, and they spent almost their entire time in World War II floating around in the East China Sea. So, not really a whole lot that went on in that. I don't know. They didn't really do a whole lot. We'll just go with that. Uji, I guess you could say Uji had kind of an interesting history. I mean, she survived World War II and was given to the Republic of China and later confiscated by the People's Republic of China, which is the communist part of China, or then at the time, the communist China, and was scrapped sometime in the 1980s. Not really a whole lot of interest going on there. She did manage to launch a depth charge attack against the USS Spearfish, SS-190, in the East China Sea, but ultimately, obviously, Spearfish got away. So, not a lot going on in terms of history. So let's dive into the stats real quick, and then we're just going to jump straight into a battle video, because we're not even going to talk about upgrades or anything crazy like that. Stats, 5,150 hit points, 5,150. She's got 30 millimeters of armor, which, of all the Tier 1s, the ship is exceptionally easy to citadel with an even HE. Yes, that's possible. Yes, that's a thing. Just need to hit the right spot. Hint, hint, it's highlighted in green in the armor viewer. Main battery consists of 4 120mm guns. They are mounted in 2 dual turrets, one fore, one aft. They have a 9.1k range. She does have AA, but at Tier 1, there are no aircraft carriers for which you to worry about. She has a 19.5 knot top speed, 270-meter turning radius, and 3-second rudder shift time. Detection range of 7.7 kilometers by sea and 4.7 by air. Not that you'll ever see any air. So that's kind of Hashidate in a nutshell, and, well, let's just dive straight into the battle video, and we'll talk more there. We got plenty of time to chat about what the Japanese cruisers are like by the time we get to Zhao at Tier 10. Alright, so like I said, we're not going to spend any real time talking about tactics for Tier 1 battles. That's not what this video is about. More or less, I'm going to give my thoughts on what I think of the status of the Japanese cruiser line are, whether or not I would recommend them as, say, a starter ship line for somebody who's just starting out in cruisers and wants to play them, as well as the overall general tactics. So let's start with the strong suits of Japanese cruisers overall. HE. Yep, high explosive. So if you're looking for a line that is the burn everything to the ground line, this is definitely your line. They have the strongest HE in the game. Not necessarily by raw penetration capabilities. That actually goes to the Germans, because raisins. I honestly don't know why the Germans get better HE pen, but whatever. Fire starting chance, I think fire starting chance actually goes to the Russians, but the Japanese are very close behind. I'd have to double check the stats on that just to be sure, but in general, the Japanese fire starting chance is really good. And if you throw Demo Expert on the captain, you can actually increase this and make you the ultimate in blowtorches. That's just the best way to really describe them. Also, these cruisers ditch 6-inch guns faster than any other cruiser line in the game. You will see 6-inch guns go away at least until Tier 8, where you have an option to get 6-inch guns on Mogami. But the 6-inch guns go away at Tier 5 with Furutaka, which picks up 8-inch guns at a whole 2 tiers before any other nation gets anything but basically 6-inch guns. And that is definitely an interesting experience because, quite honestly, these ships seem pretty middle of the road when it comes to stuff. So you've got a lot of HE damage potential, but the AP is no slouch either. It's not the best AP in the game. That obviously you can debate whether that's US AP or Royal Navy AP, depending on how you look at the damage numbers and the reliability of the damage. You could also even argue that Germans have better AP in certain circumstances, but ultimately the Japanese tend to have very strong HE with kind of middle-of-the-road AP. But when you get to Furutaka, your 8-inch AP will literally penetrate the bows of most cruisers at that tier. So you get a lot of ability there that other nations don't have at that tier. Also, Japanese cruisers all have torpedoes starting at Tier 3 with Tenryu, which is fantastic because the torpedoes on Tenryu are actually pretty solid and usable, especially when you get real up close and personal. And of course, by the time you get up into Kuma and Furutaka, they just become absolutely fantastic. And it's the typical Japanese torpedo line. You get pretty good options in terms of damage output with them. They have reasonably good arcs, although I found that most of the cruisers tend to have arcs that favor like a retreating posture, so kiting. Unfortunately, the gun layout on most of those ships definitely does not blend any strong, like, the gun layouts just don't favor that kind of play style. The torpedoes definitely do. So I found that the torpedoes, while extremely useful, are definitely more useful at area denial and caps, where you need to bail out, but you can't, you can't just, you just can't let them have the cap uncontested. So your basic goal there is to deny them the ability to capture that area. In terms of range, Japanese guns don't have the longest range in the game, however, they do have pretty usable range, and their primary focus is going to be on the mid to long ranges, similar to the Germans, but their HE is definitely going to be their stronger suit, so you don't have to worry about the AP damage problems that the Germans had, because HE always does some damage if it doesn't just break on the whole. So if you can hit the superstructure, you don't have to worry about penetration. You're almost always going to get some level of damage from that. The other thing that the Japanese cruisers are pretty good at is stealth. They're not the stealthiest cruisers in the game by any stretch, but they are pretty solid in that department. In fact, several of these cruisers can stealth torpedo. Mostly Atago and Ibuki, I think, can barely do it. If you build full stealth, you can get the ability to stealth fire torpedoes. Most of them are stealthy enough that you can launch torpedoes at advancing enemies from stealth and they will still find way. I think, with the exception of at the low tiers and Zhao at tier 10, all of the cruisers have 10k or 8k torps, so the torpedoes are actually very usable. Well, I guess Zhao has 8k torps. Yeah, so I mean, you've got plenty of options when it comes down to using torpedoes defensively there. Ooh, random HE Citadel on a Black Swan. Anyway, So that's kind of the torpedo situation, and the gun situation, mostly that mid to long range playstyle. One downside to Japanese cruisers is their overall durability. So this is probably the one area where they are the weakest. I don't want to call it paper-thin armor. It can be very trollish at times. Sometimes you'll be angled and you'll eat citadels through the nose, or even while angled, it'll come in through the belt and penetrate into your citadel. The next match, you'll be playing around and you'll do the same situation, repeat it, and nothing. You'll get overpens against you. It's a really weird situation. Anybody who's played like Atago would be very, very familiar with how trollish that armor can be. Zhao takes this to like level 90 in terms of how trollish the armor can be, and you'll be sitting there shooting at a Zhao, and one day you'll get 3 citadels, and the next you'll get nothing but overpens. And it can be very frustrating to play because if you're not angled correctly, or if you're angled at all, sometimes you'll get taken out, and I don't know. When it comes to dev strike memes, there's only 2 nations that seem to consistently produce dev strikes: the Royal Navy and the Japanese. So those are two downsides when it comes to overall performance in the durability department is really quite low. Thankfully, speed is reasonably quick. We're looking at pretty, I want to say average in terms of overall speed. Maneuverability is also a little on the low side, but not so low as to be, impossible to play. We're not talking about a battleship for a cruiser here. Just understand that there are definitely some downsides to their maneuverability department, and their stealth is what really makes up for it, and that's why I said they tend to play better at the longer ranges than the close ranges. Plus, they have really slow turret traverse, so they are a far cry from ships that should be used for brawling if you can avoid it. I mean, situational brawling is always going to be possible with any class of ships. You can certainly do it with the Russian cruisers. It's not impossible. It's just not something that I would consider them to be the strongest in, regardless of the fact that they have, pretty powerful torpedo armaments. And in terms of anti-aircraft capabilities, obviously this is going to basically put them in dead last. I guess French AA is okay. It's probably a little bit better than French AA because you've got the longer range DPS versus the short range DPS. Now, that's not to say that the Japanese cruisers don't have a lot of short range DPS. In fact, you'll see up at the higher tiers, basically they ditch the mid-range stuff for 25mm guns, which were an absolutely atrocious anti-aircraft gun for their time. And certainly not to be compared against the Bofors. The 40mm Bofors is just an incredible gun mount. There's a reason why it littered the decks of pretty much every Allied ship ever produced for World War II. At the time, it worked very effectively all the way up until the mass kamikaze attacks at the end of the war. And that kind of sums up their AA. Now, one thing that is interesting is that Zhao does get the 4-inch gun mounts of the Akizuki AA destroyer, the Tier 8, and that definitely adds a different dimension because Zhao's AA, it's not the best. Don't get me wrong. Des Moines still reigns king and Minotaur still reigns king, but at the end of the day, Zhao's AA is no slouch, especially since all of these cruisers basically get defensive fire from, I want to say it's Tier 5 onward. And if you get Yubari, you definitely can even get it at an even lower tier. So anyway, defensive fire is an option. Hydro is pretty much middle of the road. You can kind of get where I'm going at with this. The Japanese line overall seems to be basically a fantastic middle of the road line. And that means that in terms of teaching you things, they tend to be pretty good teachers of cruiser tactics, at least general cruiser tactics. And of all of the cruiser lines, I would say they're probably the easiest to pick up tactically. I think the US line is by far the most difficult, with the Royal Navy cruisers following close behind them. And I think the Russians, The Russians are probably right behind the Japanese in terms of ease of play. They're a little bit more finicky than the Japanese are, but overall, I think the Japanese are by far the easiest just to pick up and learn. They seem to be able to do everything with reasonable efficiency, and their main shell choice, HE, is just extremely reliable, almost too reliable, and that makes them very, very, very easy to play. And yeah, we'll just leave it at that. And there are some disadvantages to learning, Japanese cruiser gameplay, particularly the over-reliance on torpedoes. If you're a type of player who likes to use torpedoes all the time, it can be very difficult to transition from Japanese cruisers to, say, American cruisers, which lose torpedoes at Tier 6, and like Russian cruisers, which kind of have them on and off again, and yeah. About the only line that the torpedo reliance really benefits you transitioning to is probably the Royal Navy cruiser line, which actually has pretty good torpedoes for pretty much their entire the entire time you play them, and all the way up to and including the Minotaur at Tier 10. So that's just kind of my impressions of the Japanese line. There are a couple of the ships that I haven't had the opportunity to play, but just one of special note. I know that in the Captain Skills video, I mentioned that you don't have 6-inch guns long enough to justify IFHE. I will be the first person to admit that I made a bit of a mistake there, because I totally forgot that Mogami gets the option to 6-inch guns. And yes, you heard that right. So Mogami in real life had both guns. She originally launched with the 6-inch guns and then was planned to have the 8-inch guns later, and I can't remember if they actually ended up getting them or not. But it should be noted that they definitely had the option. Anyway, at Tier 8, you do have the option of choosing 6-inch gun mounts. They recently buffed the turret traverse on them so that they aren't completely awful like they used to be. By used to be, I'm referring to the recent time frame, because there are those of us who played closed beta that remember the days of Mogami and Cleveland Hell, in which Mogamis were basically the untouchable Tier 8 cruiser, and that was before the days of IFHE, and that definitely complicated things a lot because, oh my, Mogami was a fire starter, and the rate of fire would just melt ships, and it didn't matter what they were, if they were Tier 10s or if they were Tier 6s. It was just a fantastic ship with those 6-inch guns. They eventually nerfed the rate of fire and the turret traverse, and the turret traverse got turned into basically a battleship turret traverse to really limit the effectiveness, because Mogami was actually really maneuverable, and that helped her out a lot compared to the New Orleans, which at the time was completely awful. In fact, there was absolutely nothing about New Orleans that justified her place in the game, aside from just being an XP punching bag. But things have kind of changed. They've recently rebuffed the turret traverse, and like I said, I've not had the opportunity to play, so I don't remember. I don't really know what that's like now, and I will definitely be updating you guys when I get to Mogami with my thoughts on the 6-inch versus 8-inch gun debate, and whether or not the 8-inch guns are worth having, or the rapid-fire face-melting 6-inch guns are still the way to go. So with that in mind, do know that there is an opportunity there to run IFHE on a high-tier captain. Again, Mogami at Tier 8. And so that is a correction on the Captain Skills video that should be made. Unfortunately, YouTube doesn't allow me to do annotations to throw that in there to fix that. So apologies for those who pointed it out in the comments. You guys were right. You guys were definitely right on that. So, okay, what other things can we talk about? I definitely think that the Japanese line starts off very, very, very focused on the... What's the best way to word this? Very focused on the abilities found with high explosive shells and the ability to start fire. So at the low tiers, they're very good at starting fires. And as you get higher and higher in the tiers, that ability doesn't really go away, but their AP gets more well-rounded. They start off very soft and fragile, but as you get higher and higher, they definitely get more well-rounded and a little bit more durable, or certainly a lot less likely to be just deleted from the map. That's not to say you can't still do it. In fact, Mogami players and Ibuki players definitely know that feeling of, oh crap, I've just been spotted and I'm broadside to an enemy ship, an enemy battleship. I'm about to get deleted. And German cruisers definitely take advantage of that as well because they have very, very strong AP. And so you can still delete Japanese cruisers at the high tiers, but they just in general get more and more durable overall. Oh, clutch kill here. Is it going to happen? Well, we'll go back to this Orlan. Yes! So we've managed to sink. Now all we need to do is run. Okay, so that's tactics, surprisingly, in a tier 1 match. We managed to sink the one ship. Now all we need to do is run. Anyway, I do like Zhao. Zhao is a lot of fun to play. In terms of overall tactics, though, I get a little bored with the burn everything to the ground tactic, which is kind of why I like playing another reason why I like playing Hindenburg so much. And no, it can be fun. It's just a matter of perspective and being in the right mood to play Japanese cruisers with the burn all the things gameplay style. The only other line that would really seem to match that play style, I think, effectively, is going to be high-tier Russian cruisers and French cruisers, from what I've been told. They tend to be a little bit more long and mid to long range cruisers, and that definitely has some downsides. If you're looking for in-close gameplay, I definitely wouldn't recommend the Japanese line. I struggle to recommend the U.S. line, even at this point, even with how strong Des Moines is at tier 10. Just not a line that's really well-rounded once you get past tier 6. In fact, you kind of, I don't want to say struggle, but you kind of have to deal with really poor ships from tier 7 to tier 8, and then tier 9 things start getting pretty good, and then tier 10 is like, wow, this ship is interesting, too bad it gets deleted immediately upon being spotted. Anyway, Zhao is kind of the same way, but Zhao's trollish armor makes it so that she can actually get away with that, and yeah, I guess that's the right way to word this. Basically, Zhao gets ignored most of the time simply because she's so hard to hit because she's maneuverable enough at the high tiers to actually be able to take advantage of that. And then their armor is extremely trollish. Like, battleship players will try and focus you down, but you are always going to be firing at longer ranges where you can just kind of shrug. Like, I've managed to dodge your lofty incoming shells fired at 15k. The one shell that did hit me managed to overpen my superstructure because lol reasons. And anything else seems to just kind of also do the same. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great way to describe the Zhao. Other notable ships in the line, Furutaka's recent, like 6 months ago, she got a C hull upgrade that basically turned her into a tier 5 Alba, and quite honestly, I'm not real thrilled with what it's done to the ship. I mean, yes, it made it better because it basically removed all of the downsides to Furutaka, but it just means that from tier 5 and tier 6, you're basically playing the same ship, and that got real old real fast when grinding up the line. And tier 7, I don't know. I thought it was alright for the couple games that I played. It is what it is. I don't know. I don't know of any other real way to talk about Miyoko. I mean, she's strong when she's played in a specific way, but her problem primarily relies on the fact that her armor is not exactly up to snuff, we'll say. It's hard to angle with her, but she's really narrow, which helps her out. Again, torpedo angles are really weird. They're all about the retreating torpedo angles, which is nice, but it's not a play style that her turret configuration really lends to her. Overall, though, I think the Japanese line, like I said, is a pretty good line to learn on. She has a lot that they have a lot to offer new players, especially with their general overall well-roundedness. There's not one area that they're particularly strong in aside from HE, not one area that they're particularly deficient in aside from, well, I guess their durability. And they're really not that like soft. They are pretty decent. They're definitely not the worst, but there are other lines that are more durable if you're looking for a durable cruiser line. Anyway, that's enough of me blabbing on about the status of the Japanese cruiser line. I'm your Peacekeeper. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments about the Japanese cruiser line. Like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and thanks for watching.